Well, good morning, everybody, and I hope that you all had a fantastic long weekend. Welcome to this morning's EMIC Academy webinar. For those of you who perhaps don't recognise my voice, I'm Patrick Smith. I'm the principal of the Academy, and my role is to ensure that we as EMIC members get what we need from the session. Our hosts today are Travellers, one of our valued insurance partners, and as you may be aware, they put together a short series of risk management good to better sessions. So it's a short series of just 3 sessions, and this is the second of that trilogy. And today we'll be looking at risk profiling. And our presenter today, who you can see on your screen, is Imran, who's Chief Risk Officer at Travellers Insurance. And Imran will take us through the importance of risk profiling to our businesses, share some of the principles and the detail that he uses in Travellers, and will provide some expert advice to us to help us future-proof our risk management strategy. So it should be a compelling session, I think. Okay, in terms of logistics, whilst you see Imran on your screens now, so you can see the face of the person doing the presenting, he's actually going to turn the video off during the formal presentation because some of the slides are quite busy and we don't want to restrict your reading and attention to the slide deck. The slides that you'll see, save for any confidential information, will be shared, as will an audio recording of this session. So they'll be shared via the EMIC website. You should see on your machines a GoToWebinar control panel. If you don't see the panel, but you do see a white arrow on an orange background, that's the thing that either hides it or makes it show. So on the panel, you'll see a drop down for questions. So through the session, as questions may occur to you, please do feel free to just put them on that questions panel. I will see them. And part of my job on your behalf is to pose those questions to Imran. And that will come after the formal presentation of slides. So we'll have the slide presentation from Imran for about 40 minutes and plenty of room before we close at 11 for the questions and answers. So I think the only thing I would say is on Imran's final slide, you'll see his email address. So if you feel that any of the questions that you've posed haven't been adequately dealt with, or indeed, as sometimes happens, you think of the killer question just after the session finished, Imran's very happy to receive an email from you. Okay, so let's just turn to Imran, brief introduction, then we can crack on. So Imran has over 15 years financial services risk management experience in high growth startups through to global systemically important financial institutions. He's currently the head of Risk Europe at Travellers for 3 legal entities, and his direct reports include Chief Risk and Senior Compliance Officers. He's a Chartered Financial Analyst CFA trained through his MSc at the University of Durham, and Imran has published risk event research that has been endorsed by the IRM. So we're in the hands of an expert in his field, and with that drum roll, Imran, over to you.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction and opportunity to present to you today. I have about 20 slides, some heavy, to get you out the blocks to this shortened week of working from home. I'll be moving through a good pace, keeping the focus on the content, so I will be turning my camera off as mentioned earlier, and then coming back on for some questions at the end. Before we start with any of the detail, just a disclaimer, very important. The information that we're presenting and talking through is based on things that Travellers Europe thinks are important, but have been modified to share with you. And I guess just before we jump into the detail, risk profiling is a very generic term. I won't be talking through why some individuals get searched more when they fly or go through socially distant, safe walking through the boroughs of London, but I will be talking through some modern risk management tools that we find useful in travellers to manage corporate risk. I'll be taking the time to set the context of where some of the ideas and concepts come from. I'll be talking through a day in the life of a traveller's CRO and head of ERM. I'll be focusing on the risk problem as we see it, the risk opportunity, and then some risk profiling tools, methods, and resources with a focus on operational risk. We can move on to the next slide, please. So, day in the life of an insurance CRO. Travellers here is a big company. Here is how we have summarized it specifically, but at the insurance sector has learned to operate with a level of preparedness designed to withstand the inevitable times of crisis. Insurance companies take on these challenges through managing risk. It's our industry's core competency. We aim to balance risk and reward for long-term success because we know we're going to be tested from time to time. As mentioned in the introduction, Travellers Europe has 3 primary trading insurance companies and is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Travellers Companies Inc. And here we have effectively some of the key stats for Travellers Companies Inc. just to set the context. I like to call this slide the slide of numbers. 160 plus years of experience, 30,000 employees, $29 billion written in the 2019 calendar year, 10.5% ROE against an 8.2% average, 14th consecutive year of us returning dividends to our shareholders, and a 2.1 billion investment portfolio. We're a member of the Dow Jones, and for those of you that don't know, it's a stock that tracks 30 large publicly owned blue chip companies, and the majority of our distribution is through relationships with our agents and brokers. Next slide, please. This just gives you a view, a summary view that we use to talk through risk management with our regulators. It's something that the process that the CRO or the head of ERM owns in an insurance company. Essentially, if you start with the grey, the light grey boxes, we agree our business plan with Travellers Group. We then conduct through the business planning process. We ask how much money we think we'll need. We look at the business we want to write and don't want to write. We then run a forecast, agree a business plan, and then we move on to the slightly darker grey shade where the risk management function kicks in. So as the business plan's agreed by our leaders, we start to then stress scenario and reverse stress test. What does that mean? We war game and think about the things that might or could change over the year. We are very quantitative and we have a lot of technical regulations, so we do have capital requirements, which is then covered in the dark grey slide. This is quite heavy, but the good news is today we'll be focusing on the risk management framework, which is on the outside of the diagram, looking at risk culture, how we go about that, and the risk register. So those are 3 items that we thought would be applicable to most, if not all, of the audience. What does this slide tell you? This slide just gives you a high-level view of, again, how it works in insurance. At the top left, you see the risk invalidation functions. All the red boxes on the outside are what we call key functions. So this just highlights to you and gives a slightly detailed but diagram view of how risk works within an insurance company. So we work closely with, for example, compliance, who also manage regulatory risk. We interact with our business specialists who are in the center of this diagram. So it's essentially just laying out that risk is all about relationships, and also technical data. Next slide, please. As well as having our group's SEC risk and rating agency requirements, Travellers Europe has further regulatory risk requirements, some of which are presented on this slide. We see two main types of regulation: rules-based, which apply consistently to everyone, and principles-based, which applies differently based on the nature, scale, and complexity of the business. Unlike black and white nature of rules-based regulation, principles-based regulation requires a company to tailor it to their business, making it far more onerous to digest, implement, and monitor. Next slide, please. For this section, I guess we've just set the context, and somebody might be thinking, is this a sales pitch? No, I just wanted to get a feel for where I'm coming from and where some of the ideas that we're going to present to you are coming from. For this next section, let's look at risk requirements applicable to many. On this call, it's a requirement for any London Stock Exchange listed firms through the Financial Reporting Council, and it's also applicable to subsidiaries of overseas listed companies, and that's through the UK Corporate Governance Code. What I've done on this slide is I've just taken the extract of the detail contained in the UK Corporate Governance Code. Why? Well, it was updated in 2018. It's applicable to accounting periods from January 2019, so it's relatively new, and this slide presents the risk management detail from that code. Again, I'm not going to go into this and read it out to you, but you get the feeling of it being high level, principles based, and this, as a result, the red text at the bottom gives our view that there is an opportunity for risk functions to tailor this. As risk management regulation is principles based regulation, there is little, we believe, in the form of detailed regulatory risk requirements. This offers flexibility through the applications of principles, and it's the responsibility of the boards to use this flexibility prudently. So what we're going to do is just show you how we've gone about answering and using that opportunity to add value to our business in the remainder of the slides. Just before I go into that, I didn't want to give you the impression that those 2 bullet points are all that's out there. Sorry, next slide, please. There is further publications out there that add to the FRC's Corporate Governance Code. So the Risk Coalition in December 2019, so about 6 months old, came up with a little bit more detail, and that's publicly available, and I've put the link there or the web address at the top. So as well as there being high-level guidance, there are some principles as well to support that. We could move on, please. A little bit of a confusing slide, this one. That's deliberate. Within large companies, there are many different professions and standards. So just on the right-hand side there, you see the various lawyers, accountants, etc. It depends on your organisation and the size of it, but I'm sure that a lot of you will be relating to this, that we see a lot of different professional standards within big companies. And what does this mean? It means it can be complex. Risk management, there are different perspectives and duplication. There are diverse professional standards and definitions, and then you've also got to think about the bias, heuristics, and assumptions that underline that. The elephant on this slide, well, it's a little bit of a story, really. The elephant in the dark is an old Indian parable where some folks bring an elephant to be exhibited into a dark room. A number of people touch and feel the elephant in the dark, and depending on where they touch it, they believe the elephant to be like a snake. For somebody who's touching the trunk, they believe the elephant to be a fan. For somebody touching the ear, the tree's a leg, the rope's a tail, and you can go on and on and on. But I guess the reason I like this story is it's an example of the limits of individual perception, and this just nicely kind of demonstrates, I guess, how we would say the problem is. But as I said before, there is an opportunity, and on the next slide we'll talk through how we go about filling some of those opportunities. So the risk conundrum is how to link those existing detailed internal risk processes to external high-level principles. When we're presented with this problem, we seek definition and structure to allow us to make risk-intelligent decisions. There are many different methodologies out there. I don't want to home in and say that this is the only one, but DMAC is one linked to Six Sigma. It helps, kind of add structure and more importantly, helps build a taxonomy of risk. I've taken a definition from a dictionary of what a taxonomy is, for those of you that don't know, and the key bits I've highlighted in bold. So we see a taxonomy as being a classification according to a predetermined system. It's a conceptual framework for discussion, analysis, or information retrieval, and mutually exclusive and unambiguous, and when taken together include all possibilities. So we advocate building a taxonomy, we advocate going about this in a structured way, and what I'm going to do is just talk you through about through the next slides and next section, how Travelers Europe's methods to profile risks. We link all risk data to a taxonomy, which changes over time and informs the risk profile. Next slide, please. These are 6 top risks applicable to most insurance companies, each with unique referencing and tagging. So majority of insurance companies will have insurance risk as their #1 risk. Give you an idea, about 90% of our capital emanates in insurance risk. There's a definition there that we use: investment risk, operational risk, credit risk, liquidity risk, and strategic risk. So our board have identified 6 key risk areas, which are defined and also listed in relevant policies as well, which we review regularly. These are fairly generic, that they would apply to the majority of the insurance sector. Next slide, please. Operational risk is one that is applicable to pretty much everybody on this call. So what we're going to do is just spike out, have a little bit of a chat and a focus on how it works for operational risk. The key thing is, I guess here, we have other risks within our company, but yeah, we thought that it would be worthwhile for just to kind of share the principles, focusing on one risk. So op risk, like the other risks, sections out into segments. Here you see the 6 segments or boxes to enable risk profiling. The first step is to identify the subject matter experts and risk owners of the key processes linked to the risks, and to source information based on objectives and performance to start to build further detail. Next slide, please. Here we see 3.1, compliance, legal and third parties. We went out and worked with our compliance and legal function to understand and also to articulate our key compliance and third party risks. I'm not going to read them out individually, but I will talk through each of the headings. Change in regulation or law, we see a lot more regulation coming towards our various organizations, and we have to keep on top of that. Compliance, making sure that we have all of our permissions and are adhering to the standards that we expect and the regulator expects. Governance, making sure that we are challenging, getting the right people involved in decision making, and then legal, dispute and contract, and any potential disagreements with third parties and suppliers and partners. Next bucket is conduct risk, where we work with our distribution, sales and marketing teams. So we have risks relating to complaints, customer service, literature defects, mis-selling, product and service development. Again, these will just be, rather than kind of thinking, great, all of these risks are now done for me, they're kind of just giving you headings and giving you a view of how we go about it and who we've worked with. So I think the important thing here that is find the SMEs and work out which one of these risks might be applicable to your business and tailor them. Next up, after conduct, we have data management and reporting, something that is becoming increasingly important in today's data age. So we went out and worked, the risk function worked with the IT, business intelligence and management information teams to articulate and define our data risks, which are data supplied by partners, errors, gaps, or delays in accounting, financial, and management information, handling of sensitive or confidential data, and manual data handling and computation. On the next bucket, one that Joe will be talking about in the next series, or the third part of the series, focusing on HR. So we went out and spoke specifically with our HR specialists to define and articulate what we perceived as our HR risks, which we've summarized as resources, employee engagement, employee litigation, not very common, and talent and succession. (3.5), another box for us to profile risk against, financial crime, very important. Here we went out to work with our compliance, claim and underwriting functions to build the profile for financial crime, where we are monitoring and tracking data linked to bribery and corruption, external fraud, internal fraud, money laundering, and sanctions. And then the final of the 6 buckets to profile operational risk against, infrastructure security and change. Here we worked with our information security, information technology and business continuity teams to define a number of risks that would fall into this bucket. So application, infrastructure or network, business continuity and disaster recovery. And for those of you eagle-eyed, you'll see the word pandemic, which is very topical and very relevant for now. 3.63, project management, and 3.64, system security, loss or damage to assets. Just before we move on, I'm just going to take a pause there, and if we can just hold this slide for a second. There's been quite a lot I've got through in the last 10-15 minutes. So I just wanted to kind of have a pause here. So you've got a little bit of a feel for who Travellers are and where some of our ideas come from. You've got an idea about our regulators and expectations. We outlined we've got 3 different legal entities. What we've outlined as the problem, which is also strength, which is having many different skilled subject matter experts across the business that are already working to standards, processes articulated in the business, and then the risk functions coming along to articulate, lift up a level, build a taxonomy, so come up with some structure on how risk works. And what we've done is we've focused in on operational risk. Why operational risk? Because it's something that 99, if not 100% of the people on this call will be managing or doing in their day-to-day work. And yeah, quite apt that 362 is in front of us right now, where essentially, 5 years ago we sat down with our specialists. We identified the risk of an unexpected discontinuation of business processes, including access to facilities following a natural or man-made catastrophe. Hopefully we won't see any acts of war on UK shores or in Europe for some time, but pandemic, critical IT failures, industrial accidents, failure of business continuity or disaster recovery. We'll all have seen over the past few months as kind of rely on business continuity and disaster recovery. I'm pleased to say that the majority of companies that I've observed have done quite well. Some haven't. Some have done better than others. But yeah, exactly the fact that we were able to articulate the risk, gather data, assign ownership, and test it puts Travellers and Travellers Europe businesses in a great spot. And part of that is absolutely through the work that the risk function does through articulating the risk. So some of you might be thinking, all right, well done, pat yourself on the back. 362, you've got the word pandemic in, but how does this help me manage my business? How does this help me manage a pandemic or of the other 30 or so operational risks that we've gone through? How does this profiling approach add value to my business? And the next section starts to talk about how we within Travellers Europe, what data we gather against those risks. So we start with something called risk drivers. This section is important enough that I will be taking the time to read through the slides to you and just pick out the bits. Because I guess the way that we see it is you can articulate and work with your own subject matter experts to define your own list of risks. But then what do you do after that? What are the tools and methods that Travellers Europe companies have used historically and that we have, that's absolutely helped our businesses to stand up at times of crisis and also, more importantly, it enables our business to flourish, to write risk and accept risk. So we, against all those risks, we track a number of intelligence and data variables, the first one being risk drivers. Risk drivers are also known as threats or potential causes of risk. Risk drivers can amplify risks and or alter the relationship or correlation between them over time. Risk drivers tend to headline the ways it is perceived that risk performance could or would fluctuate. So what we're saying is we've got the risks locked down and defined, but actually over the months, the weeks, or the course of a year, things change and different. So whilst we listed pandemic on the previous slide, I'm quite happy to say we didn't list coronavirus. Why? We didn't know about it. Coronavirus would be the sort of thing that would now be a priority risk driver against that risk because it's at the forefront of our business leaders' mind. So risk drivers are important and are essentially move and fluctuate as risk move, as risk and as the business moves. As well as risk drivers, we also capture additional information on key risk indicators. More risk intelligence, we believe, should be forward-looking, and that's important here. So a key risk indicator should be leading forward-looking metrics to give early warning to identify potential events that may harm the continuity of a major or critical business activities. The very important thing here is in the brackets, the forward-looking. We see a lot of operational MI, so KPIs, where people run the business or subject matter experts run the business based on what's happened over the last month, week, or quarter. KRIs and risk management is all about what's going to happen for the next 12 months looking forward based on everything we know today. So KRI should be linked to the business's risk appetite, should be effective at measuring or indicating changes in the actual risk level, and cover performance, economic, and trend metrics. KRIs are normally sourced from existing MI where possible. So essentially risk functions should be leveraging what subject matter experts do already. And they should include things like stress indicators, monitoring any significant rise or diversion of resources, metrics linked to conduct and customer outcomes, causal indicators monitoring drivers of risks in view of business objectives, and exposure indicators quantifying and tracking significant changes in the business environment and its exposure to critical stakeholders or critical resources. Good KRIs, they're compiled on a consistent basis, ideally from a system or a ledger, to enable trend and patterns to be identified over time. It should be relevant and proportionate to the risk in question and focus on outcomes rather than process. They should be timely and available without delay to enable appropriate action to be identified and undertaken where required. They should be accurate and reliable both in qualitative and quantitative content. That's KRIs. Other bits of risk intelligence that we capture against risks in our taxonomy are risk events. Risk event is defined as the risk of loss resulting from inadequate or failed internal processes, people, and systems, or from external events. I'm just going to stop there for a second because I guess there's sometimes when I explain this to people, they kind of look and go, "Well, that's pretty much everything, right?" It's a risk. It's a risk of a loss, and yeah, it's potentially from external events as well. So yeah, in a wide range of processes and business areas can give rise to risk events. Typically, a risk event can divert resources, result in a complaint, dispute, or litigation, or increase reputational risk through external notifications. In our companies, the risk function is informed of any potentially medium, high, or very high risk events as soon as possible. We mandate that should be within 2 working days, but each risk event is different. And what we do is we allow our business leaders flexibility of working up to 10 working days before they start to engage with the risk function. I guess some of you might be looking at that thinking, what's medium, high, or very high? Fear not, we will be covering those in some slides coming up. But why should an organization track risk events data and link it to a risk profiling taxonomy? It reduces the likelihood and or impact of future events. It helps monitor and deliver fair customer outcomes. It helps have a centralized response that eliminates duplication of effort. Again, back to identifying trends. And it helps us understand control effectiveness. So all risk intelligence is timely and seeks to benefit the sustainability of the business. So we talked a little bit about what's high, very high, medium. This is a very busy slide. I'll apologize for that. I'm not expecting you to work through this, but I am just going to work through a couple of principles that we've captured. So risk assessments are detailed within Travelers. We don't just have a high, medium, low, and then let people color in boxes to kind of reflect that. We're detailed, we're structured, we consider quantitative and qualitative measures. Some risks, as you'll know, are difficult to quantify and linked to business resilience. So on this diagram, we're getting a view of how 5 years ago, one of the Travelers businesses charted risk impact. Some of the data in here is dummy data. So the numbers, for example, and some of the words have been changed, so I can share them with you. But what's going on here? We advocate a 5x5 risk assessment methodology. Why? It allows more detail. The Prudential Regulatory Authority use a 5. We've seen a coronavirus pandemic kind of 5 scale, so it just gives the chance to get more detail in there. Along the left-hand side, you see the impact going from 1 very low through to 5 very high, and along the top, you get to see the different quantitative and qualitative variables that we use to assess risk against. Starting in the first column, we track against profit, so pounds and pence for risks that are easier to quantify. Again, these numbers would be dependent on your business's target over the next 12 months, how profitable you've been historically, and ranges don't have to be uniform as you work through the gradings. We then think about reputation and the business's reputation with our regulators, the industry, or legal body. So just to kind of go from the least extreme, very low, where a risk has minor non-public criticism or non-public feedback, all the way through to very high, where there is potential enforcement action, withdrawal of membership or trading license, and prosecution and perhaps government action. The good news is we haven't seen any very high risks on our watch linked to this, but again, it just gives you the ability to think through the worst case scenarios linked to risks. Next column along, we have reputation with our, sorry if you could just stay back, is reputation with our customers and partners. So we track and assess risks about our perception in the market, how our large companies and large clients and accounts will react to news. And what's out there as well. If you look right at the bottom, we're tracking risks against what's out there in social media as well. So reputation is important. Our own people, in the fourth column along, we track the motivation, trust, recruitment, attraction of talent, very important. And then finally, in the last column, something that we see has become more important as time has gone on, and linked to business resilience. So we're actually talking about the risks to our infrastructure. So we may have risks, for example, that mean that five users can't do something or can't access non-critical systems, and they're very low, all the way through to very high, where we're unable to get our IT systems to respond for 3 days, or a major process is interrupted. So again, to go through this kind of process of thinking through with your business leaders. If we're going to set up a scale of 1 to 5, what's in there? There should be enough here to get you thinking, but I would particularly highlight we're advocates of a 5 by 5, and we also advocate risk being tracked and assessed by qualitative and quantitative variables, as we've demonstrated on this slide. On the next slide, there's many different aspects to risk. So we talked about the 5 by 5 of impact. We also work to a 5 scale for likelihood, and this kind of just tracks that down from 10% chance of it happening exceptionally through to 90% or greater, where the risk happens frequently. We also track the performance of our internal controls. So how good are we at mitigating the risk? All the way from 1 poor, we're not doing anything to manage the risk, through to 5 excellent. Yeah, I guess for those of you who are forward thinking, like our businesses, that very last line in the excellent box, all controls are fully automated, efficient, and able to automatically adjust to changes. We are actively preparing and thinking about robotic process automation within our businesses. We see it as the future. The good news is we don't think it's going to take everybody's job, but it will make potential manual and tough tasks simpler. And what we're trying to advocate through our risk management framework is that our business leaders consider fully automated controls and reconciliations that can adjust without human intervention. Still a long way to go, but are you thinking about those things for your business, and how can the risk function and risk profiling help you with that journey? The final bit of data to talk about, well, I guess let's stop there for a second. So that's again, so whistle stop through risk intelligence. What do we do with the information that we gather linked to our risk taxonomy? I'll probably draw a line there and say everything that's been before up to this point in the presentation. I've talked about the risks. I've talked about the intelligence that we build around our 12-month risk register. So our risk register and everything that we have in our taxonomy effectively articulates what our subject matter experts, our board, and the risk function, the CRO, think are the risks that we should pay attention to and manage over the next 12 months. What happens to risks that are longer than a 12-month or outside of that 12-month time horizon? We also have something called an emerging risk process. An emerging risk, as we've defined it, is an issue or trend that has potential implications, positive or negative, so it's upside and downside, could materially impact the company. And then it gets a little bit insurance-y where we talk about the specific things. But yeah, emerging risks are issues or trends not tracked in the risk register. The early identification of emerging risks enables management actions to be prioritized and resourced to enhance business resilience. How can you keep on top of emerging risks? Again, we've talked about all those subject matter experts out there. They will be scanning the horizons based on what they see for future risks, and they should identify and raise those to the risk function. So the risk function and risk profiling should absolutely be linked to emerging risks and subject matter experts. As well as emerging risks, I talked a little bit about wargaming. What does that mean? We stress test all of the risks in our risk taxonomy. So all those operational risks, we will sit down once a year, if not more frequently, depending on what's going on, and we'll stress and scenario test those risks. What's stress and scenario testing? It's an important forward-looking tool. It forms part of the risk management framework as it is used to develop robust and integrated business, capital, and risk plans. It also assists in discussions of low probability events or events that have not occurred in the recent past or at all. We're seeing a lot more risks. We're getting asked about climate change. We're getting asked about cyber. We're getting asked about COVID-19. These are risks where there isn't a lot, if any, historical data. So how do we manage those? Through this framework, we will sit down and we'll come up with some ideas. We'll look at our sophisticated modeling techniques. We'll look at our risk register. We'll look at our emerging risks, risk events and KRIs and external benchmarking, and all the information that we've talked through already. We'll also keep an eye on what our regulators are identifying. We'll sit with our stakeholders in our group, and we'll come up with some ideas to pressure test our risks. We then sit down and design scenarios. We think about 1 year through to 5 year. We think about profit. We think about reputation, again linked to the assessment table I talked through earlier. We think about what our customers could think, what our own people will think, and how our infrastructure will hold out. We then simulate the scenarios. We look at how things could interact with each other, potential correlations, look at a return period. So would this happen in month 1? Would it be bad in month 3? Could we do something by month 3? And then at the end, once we've gone through all of that, make believe, some would say, but actually really useful kind of pressure testing of our risks. We then think about what can we do to make our business resilient, not if it happens, but when some of these risks materialize. So I think a key thing that I would say is we prepare our business for risk to happen. We expect risk to happen. We're happy to see and manage risks when they hit amber, and that's part and parcel of risk maturity. Okay, some of you might be thinking this is quite heavy and we're coming in the last few minutes, so bear with me. Some of you might be thinking, all right, well done, Imran. You've talked me through insurance risk management and get it. It's complex. What about those of you in the audience that aren't financial services or maybe aren't insurance companies? How can risk profiling help you? We have an answer to that as well. Because I guess all companies have insurances in place that reflect its risk profile. Some of your companies will buy company insurances from travelers, and Davis talked about cyber insurance in the previous session. Insurance doesn't prevent something from occurring, but it does mean that if you have insurance, you're ready for the unexpected. Not all risks that I've covered in the profiling and taxonomy can be covered by insurance. There are many risks that do not have a direct financial impact, and alternative risk management strategies would be required. But again, this and risk profiling would help bring attention and awareness. Risk-based decisions can be made to accept or not accept a risk based on cost-benefit assessment. In the red box here, we would expect boards of non-financial services or non-insurance companies to consider whether all insurable risks are insured appropriately, determine the appropriate level of insurance based on the company's risk profile that I've talked about for the next 12 months. We'd expect them to ensure that there was a current register of insurance and indemnities maintained and linked to the risk management system, to the taxonomy, to the assessments. We'd ensure that financial impacts of any indemnities have been adequately assessed and aligned with the company's risk appetite. And then finally, we'd expect to ensure that risk event data is provided to the risk function of your company, subject matter experts, and if it's material, potentially to your insurer as well as a precautionary notification. This just gives you a little feel for if you were kind of thinking before, this seems really detailed, it's not applicable to my business. I guess what I'm saying is it is. It might not be applicable in the same level of detail, the same level of rigor that we have, the same level of maturity that we have here in Travelers, but there are some aspects that you should absolutely be thinking about linking potentially to your company insurances. Summary to close. Passion for order and evidence. Every future company endeavour will rely on the readiness of the risk management system. I've gone through risk for the last 15 years, from hearing discussions of people saying, why do I need risk management? I can run and have run my business successfully for the past 20 years. This is a regulator's tick box exercise. I'm pleased to say there's times going on, and senior leaders are coming through the ranks, absolutely having risk management at the forefront of their mind, and also that there's now more credible structures, methods out there, that the risk management system's able to inform and assist with big decisions. And if you're not already using the sort of system that I've outlined today, then have a little think about what principles you could take back to your organization and develop to get ready, and to develop the credibility of the risk function within your organization. We're big advocates, and we think the risk profiling is all about decision making based on facts and specialist assessments. Relationships. Subject matter experts are vital to the success of risk profiling. A good risk function, it doesn't matter how skilled they are, will always be one step removed from managing risk. So working with subject matter experts to understand the assumptions, data sources and behavior is critical to the success of risk profiling. And the final point, this is all about continuous improvement. The business profile is never static, and data models only come close to optimal results. The real world is difficult to account for, and figuring out every situation is virtually impossible. So we continuously develop our risk profiling methods, our taxonomy. We add, drop, tweak data that we gather, but we try and keep that relevant and evolve it to our business requirements. Again, I guess that there's a tendency that I've seen that people come up with something, then stop and take their foot off the accelerator and pat themselves on the back. Actually, with what's happening at the moment, the current business environment, we've changed it. This is a 4 or 5 year old kind of risk management framework. We've moved on since then. The principles still hold up. But I guess what I'm trying to say is risk and risk profiling is something that is constantly changing. That is everything I was wanting to talk through. Hope you found some elements of it useful. Just a reminder before I close that this is a hypothetical risk framework based on some of the things that have stood up travelers' businesses in Europe well over time. They may or may not be a correct replication of what we do, but they should help inform you. If there's anything you've looked through and you thought we've missed something, we're very keen on that point of continuous improvement. If you think there's an operational risk that we haven't articulated well, or that we're missing, or you've got some techniques that you use within your organization that I haven't covered, I'd be delighted to hear from you, and perhaps just talk through some of those points just to understand, because yeah, it would help what we view and what I view as a modern risk management method, all built around risk profiling. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and that's my formal presentation coming to a close.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Imran, and I'll let you just take a deep breath from that action-packed, content-filled 40 minutes or so. I've got a few questions, inevitably, so thank you very much indeed. I think the first question is, how do you interact with your compliance and internal audit colleagues?
Good question. Part of my role is that I lead the compliance function, so we see a lot of synergy between risk and compliance. Sometimes people, in fact, they ask me, Imran, what's the difference between a good compliance professional and what's the characteristics of a good risk professional? And the way that I see it is that risk is very much about forward-looking and forecasting based on today's available information. And compliance and audit is a little bit more about checking, making sure that you're adhering to internal processes and or regulation. So the skill sets are slightly different, but there is a lot of synergy there, that you're working with experts in the first line of defense. So within our organization, compliance, risk and audit will work with underwriters, claims specialists, investment professionals, So the skills there and relationship, I think I played it 3 times where I said relationships. That includes, as well as our experts in the first line of defense, to be successful in risk means that I have to have working relationships with compliance and audit. But more importantly, the risk methods are endorsed and followed by our internal audit and compliance functions. What does that mean? We carry out risk-based assurance work. So we can't check every single bit of legislation and compliance across our organization, but we do follow a risk-based approach of working out what we think is material, what could cause us a problem, or could be of interest to external parties over the next 12 months. And that's how risk informs compliance and audit activity.
So I think what I'm hearing and what I would advocate to the audience is that it's probably less important that risk and compliance maybe sit within the same org structure in your organizations, but creating, complete alignment with the more forward-looking risk activities versus, dare I say it, the checking, the control checking, or the rear view mirror. To really be cohesive to the business, the methodologies must be somewhat sort of interlinked and must be aligned. So that's a really useful confirmation. And I would also say to everybody on, having been myself a CRO in a financial services organization and led risk in non-FS companies, the methods, are really very similar. I mean, some of the descriptors on the precise risks might be different, but as you led us, Imran, through the operational risk, we can all flavour the structure that you outlined to the operational risks in our businesses. Just moving on, something that maybe is critically important, maybe not, but how important is corporate culture to the success of your ERM system and your ERM plans? And sort of asked another way, how have you sold in the value of risk to your senior management to get your accreditation to act?
Yeah, good question. Great question. I'm very fortunate. I guess when I started off, I talked about the 160 years of history of Travelers. And in the insurance industry, risk is at the forefront of everybody's mind. The real challenge has been making sure not to duplicate and leverage existing information so that you're not stepping on other people's toes, and also working with them, not against them, but a culture of candor. So I talked about risk events. Essentially, if I see something and I'm part culpable in that, is it easier for me to fix it and move on without telling anybody? Absolutely. Is it better for the business for me to fix it, shine a little bit of transparency on it so that others who are in similar roles like me or that may encounter the problem in the future can deal with it effectively? And that's the importance of candor and culture. Unfortunately, we see the stories that hit the press, and there's too many to talk about, but essentially where individuals take the first approach of trying to fix it and not tell or involve the risk management framework. Now, the flip side is when you sat in the center, to not judge and to go about investigations and documentation and investigations without bias. So I always point out that the people that you're working with in risk have demanding day jobs where risk management is, depending on their role, maybe 10, 20%. They will be underwriting, they will be investing, they will be handling claims, and just making sure that you make it efficient. We do all the heavy lifting centrally, so you saw a lot of detail. Some of you might be thinking, whoa, that's too much detail, but actually it gives our leaders the ability to pick a 1 to 5 and supplement that with data, and that means that they can link what they're doing already into the risk management framework, and I think that's important to get people on side. But yeah, you're right. If people don't have that culture of candor, transparency and honesty, it doesn't matter how good your risk management framework is, risk events won't link to it, KRIs won't be meaningful, and the actual real information will either be going to individuals or not collected at all. But that's again a maturity thing. Once you get up and running with a risk management profiling method, I think over time people start to see the benefits. People see it as a classification structure and an intelligence structure that helps them manage their business.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, we heard what you said around risk events, and I think the design and launch of your risk event reporting process is probably key to have risk perceived as a positive thing in the company rather than some sort of blame device, if you like. And it drew me to think as you were talking about that actually having a culture where events are willingly reported as a strength of the organization is absolutely key, whether or not a loss has been suffered. So generally, I think it's fair to say more major risks that crystallize and financial losses when suffered, kind of everybody knows about it. It's actually those kind of near misses and those events as they happen reported that may not have incurred a loss is probably indicative of the culture of the organization to make that a positive thing. And from a risk management perspective, you get to see the aggregation effect of all the small stuff that happens, being keen to sort of differentiate between a risk event and, if you like, a control failure that compliance might pick up. So really interesting on that score. At AMIC, we're often told by software providers that risk management software is absolutely key critical, and I guess they would say that, wouldn't they? You've shown a very sort of elaborate process of locking down risks and the ongoing management. How important do you think it is to have effective risk management software to support your framework and everything you do? Do you think that's important?
I'm going to be a bit controversial here, and what I'd say is it would. I don't believe it's important, but there's a big but. It depends on the size of your organisation and how geographically dispersed it is. If you have, I don't know, like Travellers has 30,000 employees scattered around different countries and continents, then having the risk system is important. But for organisations that might be based in one location or have smaller numbers, a couple of hundred, then do you need a risk management system? And I guess ultimately, over my 15 years, as good as risk management systems are, they're only as good as what you put in. So back to that point of how good is your framework, how good is your data, how seriously are people escalating information to you? So a little pinch of salt with systems, but very important to think about that in the context of your organization.
Yeah, fantastic. Just one question on some of the detail that you produce. In the interest of time, we'll be quick on this one, I think. Do you link each risk event to your risk taxonomy? So, for example, risk event assigned to 3.6.2 and use that to report upwards. In addition, how do you report that effectively? So quite a complex question for a brief answer.
Yeah.
But
No, not all. The whole strength of the taxonomy is that everything has individual. So profiling, as we know, is about boxes. There's 30 boxes that we've demonstrated. We have considerably more. So everything falls off a unique reference. So when you hit 361, you will know instantly that it's linked to application. And that could be KRI, risk events. All that risk intelligence I talked about gets linked and tagged through the profile. In terms of reporting, because it's taxonomy driven, we can give the high level view. So I talked about the board having 6 top risks. We color those in. So we give the board those 6 top risks. We'll say, for example, 5 of these are green, and based on the data that we forecast, 1 of them's red. We'll then spike out that risk and report the bits that are driving that result. So it's not a here's everything board, have a look. What we say is we've done the process. Here's the high level view. And actually, here's the bits of importance. So our risk reporting is never static. It doesn't repeat the same things. It depends on what risks and what data is driving the assessment and forward-looking analysis.
Right, brilliant, very clear, Imran. Thank you. So good question. So just in summary, I think we're hitting our deadline now. People will have other Zoom calls and so forth to go to, no doubt. So from my observation, I think the reverse stress test process that you articulated really works for most organizations. And just as a reminder, that's asking the question a different way. It's saying that your company has gone bust. How did it happen? You're not asking how likely is it that your company will go bust. So I think that tends to get the attention of execs when you ask the question in that way. I think the risk coalition information that you gave us the link to is good, and you'll have noticed to the audience there are a number of links posted to the chat of sort of relative information, and I think it was a great insight and very transparent sharing of your level 1, level 2 and level 3 descriptors of risk categorization, which may be something that all our attendees can double check. Are they categorizing in the same way if they think it's relevant? So I think with that we'll just now wrap up. Again, the slides and the recording will be made available on the website. Really appreciate everybody taking time out to attend. We live in challenging times, and you know, I hope that everybody remains in good health, and particularly in good spirit. The third part of the trilogy, which centers on people and balancing people well-being with delivering the needs of clients, is on 26th of May. So if you're interested, be sure to sign up. And just one last word, today is the day that EMIC has launched its brand new mentoring scheme. So if you look at the EMIC website, there is now a tab called mentoring. It launched this morning, so you're getting the first advice. If you wish to mentor or to be mentored, you can register on that site. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Imran, for your time. Thank you for attending, and we'll close there. Thank you.